Počinje još jedno izdanje Jazeera Svijeta. Ja sam Azra Hadžić. U ovoj emisiji izdvajamo. Jesu li Izrael i Liban na rubu rata? Kolika je moć Hezbollaha i koji su mu ciljevi? Kakva je uloga Izraela u njegovom nastanku? U Gazi se vodi rat protiv djece, stav je UN-a. Deseci hiljada ubijenih, ranjenih, nestalih i siročadi. Poznati izraelski historičar za Jazeeru Balkans govori o podijeljenosti izraelskog društva te zašto Izrael uživa takav imunitet. Mnogi vojni stručnjaci smatraju ga jednim od najmoćnijih nedržavnih aktera u svijetu, ali to je istovremeno popularna politička stranka s demokratskim mandatom. Libanskom Hezbollahu jedni se dive, a drugi ga preziru. Ako Hezbollah i Izrael krenu u rat širih razmjera, to bi moglo uzrokovati razaranje bez presedana. Međutim, zašto bi se to dogodilo i kako je Izrael uopće pomogao u nastanku Hezbollaha, pogledajte u priči Al Jazeera Plus.
Could Israel's war in Gaza turn into an all-out war with Hezbollah?
إذا فكر العدو أن يشن حربا على لبنان حينئذ سيكون قتالنا بلا سقوف بلا حدود بلا قواعد بلا ضوابط.
It's one of Israel's most feared enemies, one of Iran's strongest partners, and one of Hamas's closest allies.
It's considered actually by many military experts as the sort of most powerful non-state actor in the world.
But at the same time, a popular political party with a democratic mandate, admired and hated across the Middle East.
Hezbollah.
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 So let's look at Hezbollah, why it likely would not even exist if it weren't for Israel, and what a war between them would look like. In 1982, Israeli tanks crossed the border with Lebanon, launching an invasion that killed tens of thousands of Lebanese and Palestinians. Israel had two goals: to drive the Palestine Liberation Organization out of Lebanon and to empower its allies to take over the country. Israel eventually achieved its first goal, but failed in the second. Instead, its invasion led to the creation of Hezbollah. Hezbollah's name in Arabic literally means the party of God. And to help us learn more about the group, we're going to talk to Amal Saad, who studied them for decades.
I've written a book on Hezbollah called Hezbollah Politics and Religion. I'm currently writing a book on the organization's regional role and regional power.
And she's going to help us understand the group's goals and motivations and why she thinks a big war between it and Israel is inevitable. Let's start with a bit of history. Lebanon has always been a weak state. It was carved out of Syria while under French colonial rule. The political setup was designed to privilege Lebanese Christians, who were a slight majority of the population at the time. But Lebanon is also home to Muslims, Sunni and Shia, as well as other religious sects. And as is usually the case when you try to privilege one religious group in a country that's home to many, that arrangement led to disaster. And when Israel expelled hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homes in 1948, many of them ended up in refugee camps in Lebanon, tipping the demographic balance again. All this played a big part in sparking the Lebanese Civil War, a war that was 7 years old by the time of the 1982 Israeli invasion. It was in this cauldron of civil war and invasion that Hezbollah was forged. The group was founded by Lebanese Shia fighters, with Iran sending support and training.
And so there was the sort of ideological basis of Hezbollah's formation and its commitment to Iran's Wilayat al-Faqih, the supreme leader. So that was one of the bases upon which Hezbollah was formed, but the main raison d'etre was resisting Israel. It didn't sort of participate politically in anything. It wasn't really a major player in the civil war. Its fundamental role was resisting the Israeli occupation.
Hezbollah didn't stay on the outside for long. When the civil war ended in 1990, it ran in elections and has had representatives in parliament ever since. But as Lebanon was trying to put itself back together, Israel's invasion had turned into an occupation of the country's south. So while the agreement that ended the civil war disbanded all the other militias, Hezbollah was allowed to keep its weapons for the fight against Israel. Now, you might wonder why that task fell to Hezbollah instead of the Lebanese army. The answer is that the weak Lebanese state has always depended on competing outside forces.
The Lebanese army is armed by the US, and it's never been in the US's interest to arm the Lebanese army in such a way that it could confront Israel.
Hezbollah, on the other hand, is armed by Iran, although in those early days, its weapons and tactics were still pretty basic.
Hezbollah basically continued to fight a kind of low attrition warfare, guerrilla warfare against Israel to prevent it from expanding again, from building settlements as it did in occupied Palestine.
In fact, Lebanon is the only place that was occupied by Israel where Israel never built settlements. And by 1992, Hezbollah began firing rockets across the border.
So its guerrilla warfare became more sophisticated, and it embarked on what it called its Katyusha policy, whereby it would respond to Israel's attacks on civilians in Lebanon with attacks on Israel using these short-range missiles.
Israel launched several large attacks on Lebanon in the 1990s in an attempt to degrade Hezbollah's growing power, but only succeeded in killing hundreds of Lebanese civilians.
Its doctors, surgeons and nurses were neither ready nor able to cope with a shocking number of casualties.
And as Hezbollah's ambushes and attacks grew, so did the realization in Israel that it couldn't continue occupying southern Lebanon forever. In 2000, fulfilling a campaign promise, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak pulled all of Israel's soldiers out. It was the first time Israel had withdrawn from territory it had occupied without conditions or a deal. For many people in Lebanon and across the Arab world, this was a victory for Hezbollah. They were seen as liberators, and that made them very popular. But even after Israel withdrew, Hezbollah did not disarm. It justified that by saying Israel posed a continuing threat to Lebanon. Other reasons included the dispute over a tiny strip of land called the Shib'a Farms and Lebanese prisoners that were still held in Israeli jails who Hezbollah promised to free. And it did. In 2004, Hezbollah freed most of those prisoners, as well as the bodies of dead fighters held by Israel, by swapping them for one Israeli and the bodies of 3 soldiers it had captured in 2000. To free the last remaining Lebanese prisoners, in 2006, Hezbollah ambushed an Israeli military patrol, capturing 2 soldiers and killing 3 others. Now, rather than negotiate a prisoner swap as it had before, Israel went to war. For 34 days, the Israeli military destroyed large parts of southern Lebanon and the capital Beirut. Fresh off its own invasion of Iraq, the U.S. fully backed the carnage.
What we're seeing here, in a sense, is the birth pangs of a new Middle East. And whatever we do, we have to be certain that we're pushing forward to the new Middle East, not going back to the old one.
But that's not how things worked out. Hezbollah held the Israeli invasion at bay, while its rockets reached much further inside Israel than ever before. Israel had once again been thwarted by Hezbollah, whose stature had never been higher.
The Hezbollah know they're still a fighting force, still undefeated.
And after all that, Israel did end up doing the prisoner swap in 2008, with Hezbollah delivering on its promise to free the last Lebanese prisoners from Israeli jails. But the cost was high. By the time a ceasefire had been declared, over 1,100 Lebanese civilians had been killed and much of the country's infrastructure destroyed.
Lebanon took a very hard hit, especially Shia-dominant areas. Those areas were later rebuilt. The Shia community, which has customarily been overwhelmingly supportive of Hezbollah, became even more supportive.
But it would be a mistake to think that Hezbollah's support only comes from the Shia community in Lebanon.
Over the years, it has won more support from Christians, for example, because of electoral and political alliances it's made with Christian groups, as well as with some Sunnis.
What sets these alliances apart is their differing visions for which foreign powers Lebanon should follow.
Some are, supported by the US and Saudi Arabia as well, and neither of these backers, support Hezbollah's armed resistance, and they're also considered rivals of Iran or enemies in the case of the US.
So this is a good place to revisit something from earlier, Hezbollah's ties to Iran. Understanding those ties will help us understand Hezbollah's image of itself and its decisions. There's no doubt that Iran is a major source of financing, training, and weapons for Hezbollah. They share a religious identity and a political outlook that's shaped by opposition to Western influence in the region. To many of its critics, that makes Hezbollah an Iranian proxy, a group that operates and fights on behalf of Iran and its interests. Ahmed says that's simplistic and inaccurate.
Well, let's define a proxy. A proxy basically doesn't act on its own agenda. It doesn't have its own interests at heart, right? That's why it's a proxy. But Hezbollah has never done anything that has sort of contradicted its own interests or undermined them. Every act it does, every military or political action it takes, is to its advantage, even if others disagree with it. That's how it reads its own interests.
Around 2012, Hezbollah decided its interest meant joining a war outside Lebanon. An uprising against the then 40-year rule of the Assad family in Syria had turned into a devastating armed conflict. But Syria was a vital transport route for Hezbollah's weapons and an ally of both it and Iran.
The fall of the Assad regime would have meant a government or regime even that wasn't sympathetic at all to Hezbollah's resistance activity.
Hezbollah saw that potential outcome as an existential threat, especially as some of the more powerful groups now fighting the Syrian government also had explicit anti-Shia agendas. But this meant that Hezbollah was now fighting side by side with a government that, to remain in power, has killed hundreds of thousands and displaced millions of its own people. Hezbollah was no longer seen as the underdog fighting Israel. In fact, today, it's the most powerful group in a regional alliance that calls itself the Axis of Resistance.
This term started to be used in around 2008, and it consists of Iran, which leads the alliance because it's the sort of strongest power in this alliance, as well as Syria, Hezbollah, other non-state actors like Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Palestine, and Ansarullah in Yemen, as well as the Iraqi PMU groups of the Popular Mobilization Units.
Resistance here refers to defying Israeli occupation and U.S. influence in the region. These groups emerged from specific local circumstances and operate autonomously in their own countries, but they've built up a lot of support, weaponry, and fighting experience in recent years. For example, Hezbollah helps train and arm allies like Hamas. There's a lot of coordination between them, but they make their own decisions on when and where to fight.
Hezbollah is definitely militarily more powerful than any other group. It's sort of like the backbone of this alliance.
Hezbollah has come a long way from its beginning as a small group of fighters resisting Israel inside Lebanon. It's now the strongest military force and political party in the country and a part of the Lebanese state. But as the saying goes, with all that power comes responsibility. As Lebanon's economy has crashed over the last few years and corrupt politicians avoid accountability, many Lebanese have turned against the entire establishment, of which Hezbollah is now part. Yet even as the group has evolved to become the power it is now, one thing about it hasn't changed. Its main enemy is still Israel. Since the 2006 war, the two sides have mostly avoided direct fighting. Their mutual ability to inflict huge damage on each other has been an effective deterrent against a new war.
Well, obviously, Hezbollah 2.0 is much more powerful militarily than Hezbollah in 2006. Its fighting force has grown exponentially, from a few thousand men to over 100,000 fighters. It has, supposedly 150,000 missiles, so it's become much more battle-hardened as a military organization, and it's conventionalized a lot of its warfare.
Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel has made the likelihood of war between Israel and Hezbollah higher than ever. While the United States has given Israel virtually unlimited backing, Hamas's allies in the Axis of Resistance have also joined the fighting. Ansarullah in Yemen, better known as the Houthis, imposed a partial shipping blockade in the Red Sea. Iraqi militias have attacked U.S. forces in that country as well as in Syria and Jordan. Meanwhile, Hezbollah's contribution has been to target Israel directly, with both sides exchanging artillery and missile attacks almost every day.
It's very important to remember that it's not even engaged in low-intensity warfare, it's moderate intensity. It's not regular guerrilla warfare. They're firing missiles and rockets at Israel.
That intensity seems calibrated to avoid turning into a full-scale war, but the pressure is high. Tens of thousands of people from both sides of the border have been displaced, and Hezbollah says there's only one way for the attacks to end.
عندما يقف إطلاق النار في غزة سنوقف إطلاق النار في الجنوب.
Meanwhile, Israeli leaders have threatened to replicate what they've done to Gaza in Beirut. For Ahmed, it's a sign that whether now or in the future, a large war between Hezbollah and Israel remains inevitable. A few weeks into its invasion of Lebanon in 1982, Israel's prime minister at the time predicted a quick success, saying it would lead to peace for 40 years. Instead, the invasion produced Hezbollah, which 4 decades on has become Israel's biggest threat.
Just in terms of weapons alone, not even looking at tactics and the sort of tactics it's already threatened to use, such as targeting Tel Aviv and central Israel, where the majority of the population lives. It's not going to be like in 2006, where Lebanon bore the brunt of all the civilian targeting. It will be targeting in kind.
Više od 37.000 Palestinaca ubijeno je u napadima izraelskih snaga od oktobra. Gotovo polovina žrtava su djeca. UN je Izrael uvrstio na crnu listu zemalja koje krše prava djece. U toj organizaciji navode da se gotovo 21.000 maloljetnika vodi kao nestalo, a brojni su razdvojeni od porodica ili su pod ruševinama.
Ujedinjeni narodi nazvali su ga ratom protiv djece. Ministarstvo zdravstva u Gazi registriralo je više od 15.000 dječjih žrtava. Organizacije za humanitarnu pomoć ukazuju na još jednu alarmantnu činjenicu, a to su nestala djeca. Prema podacima organizacije Save the Children, od oktobra je prijavljen nestanak gotovo 21.000 maloljetnika u Gazi. 17.000 ih je bilo ili bez pratnje ili su prisilno razdvojeni od obitelji. Za najmanje 4.000 djece sumnja se da su ostala pod ruševinama nakon izraelskih napada na stambene objekte i izbjegličke kampove. Više od 19.000 djece registrirana su siročad. Njihov život djelimično ili potpuno ovisi o potpunim strancima. Izložena su sve većem riziku od zlostavljanja, iskorištavanja i zanemarivanja. Riječ je o cijeloj generaciji djece koja ne samo da su izgubila roditelje, već su ostavljena sama i nezaštićena u ratnoj zoni.
Generalni direktor Međunarodne organizacije za prava palestinske djece, Halid Kuzmar, kaže da su zločini nad djecom u Gazi bez presedana.
What's happening in Gaza is unprecedented before. We are working in this field for more than 30 years, but what we are facing, what we are witnessing is atrocities even we didn't see before, even during the Second World War. So yeah, it is a war against children. Children in Gaza are paying the big cost, the big price for the Israeli genocide on Gaza, and of course also in the West Bank, children are also subject to war crimes and crimes against humanity. The Palestinian children in Gaza are violated systematically and continuously from the Israeli army. So this is why we are talking about targeting children and war on children. Children in Gaza is around 50% of the population, as the report mentioned. So all the rights are violated. The right to life is not guaranteed anymore in Gaza. So the number of the children who are being killed, and I'm so sorry to talk about children in numbers, but the number also reflect the facts on the ground. So when we talk about around 20,000 children missed in Gaza. So those who are killed, they are about 50%, almost 50% of the killing in Gaza. And when we talk about 20,000 killed, this means that more than 40,000 being injured. And the right to health is not guaranteed anymore. Right to food, right to clean water, right to housing, adequate housing. All the right, all the necessity of the life are denied for the children in Gaza.
Ilan Pape, izraelski je historičar i profesor. Poznat je po otvorenim stavovima o izraelsko-palestinskom pitanju, kojima je izazvao i pohvale i kritike. Autor je nekoliko knjiga, uključujući Etničko čišćenje Palestine, u kojoj dovodi u pitanje tradicionalni izraelski narativ o uspostavi Izraela 1948. Za Jazeeru Balkans govori zašto Izrael uživa takav imunitet u raznim dijelovima svijeta, o podjelama u izraelskom društvu te stavovima mladih u toj zemlji o ratu koji se vodi protiv Palestinaca.
I just finished a book called Lobbying for Zionism on both sides of the Atlantic. Lobbying for Israel and Zionism is 100 years old. It's a very powerful structure. In different parts of the world, there are different reasons why Israel enjoys such immunity. Of course, where the Holocaust happened, people of a certain generation feel that they cannot pressure Israel. Then you have Christian Zionists, evangelical Christians, who believe that supporting Israel is a religious thing. Then you have the most cynical interests, military industries, security industries, that see Israel as an asset. But I think vast majority of the young generation in the world, doesn't matter in the West or not in the West, have a moral view about genocides and ethnic cleansing, and therefore I think they will be the counterforce to those forces that either for ideological, theological or strategic reasons are still supporting Israel. The main divisions in the Israeli society are around the definition of what is a Jewish state. There is an agreement that the Jewish state is one in which the Arabs either don't exist, or if they exist, they are second-rate citizens. So this is not the debate. The debate is, does a Jewish state is a liberal democratic state, to my mind apartheid as well, because of the way they will treat the Palestinians, or a theocratic state and a messianic state. So we have a real battle in Israel between, I can call it the state of Tel Aviv, you know, where people see themselves as part of the West, secular, multicultural, unless it's about the Palestinians, where, you know, LGBT community can feel welcome and so on. So this is the kind of Israel they want. And the other Israel, you can call it the state of Jerusalem, where people want the Jewish law to determine the laws of the land, where they are messianic, they believe that the whole of Palestine belongs to them. They're even more racist and supremacist, the other group, but they also treat the other Jews as heretic, unless they are willing to live in a theocracy. And this is the battle. It's a battle between a Jewish theocracy and a liberal Jewish idea of Zionism. And we once thought that the common basis would be the enemy, you know, as they would call it, the danger from the outside. But we see that even after what happened in 7th of October, they don't have a common language. And they're already fighting again in the streets between these two camps. And I cannot see them building a joint basis in the future. Unfortunately, the vast majority of young Jews in Israel support the state, support its actions against in Gaza against the Palestinians. This is the outcome of indoctrination through educational system, through the media, through socialization in the army, because it's compulsory service in Israel. And I'm afraid that their worldview does not leave much hope for a change, for reconciliation, and they justify the actions. They take part in the actions as soldiers. And I think we cannot wait for a change from within, and that's why we will have to rely on external pressure if we want to both end the genocide and prevent the next cycle of bloodshed.
Na kraju smo emisije. Sve naše sadržaje potražite na portalu balkans.aljazeera.net. Doviđenja.